Welcome to this course, Law and Society in Taiwan. Let me start by introducing what is law and what are the functions of law in society. What are laws and why do we care about laws? Well, laws are binding norms that regulate how people must behave. And if people don't behave according to the law, there will be consequences that are imposed by the government, including the threat of punishment. This is the traditional definition of law, and that's perhaps also the reason why often people associate laws with negative consequences. However, law actually also has some very positive functions. Imagine a world without laws. Wouldn't that be chaos? If there are no laws, everybody could just do anything they like, right? For example, I could just take your property or I could just kill you and nothing would happen. There would be no consequences. So now you start to see that law actually has a very positive function, namely to protect peace in society. And if we read the legal provisions, the law always is here to protect certain values. For example, when we have criminal law that prohibits murder, then it actually wants to protect the value of life. Or if we have a law that criminalizes bank robbery, then the value that's protected is to protect property. Don't just rob somebody else's property. So now we see that law is something very positive. It is here to protect peace and to protect certain values in our society. The first test question for you: what is law and what are the functions of law in society? Now, when you study law, you will soon discover that each country, each jurisdiction has its own legal system. However, to get a kind of system into all these laws, we can roughly distinguish between civil law, the common law, and other legal systems, including the mixed legal systems. So the first legal system we want to talk about is civil law. The primary source of law in a civil law jurisdiction are the written statutes or the codes. And the codes are very systematic, very organized. They have a very systematic structure. And the civil law tradition comes from the Roman law, for example. So the Romans had very famous codifications, and during their empire, they spread these codes and legal systems all over the European continent. And in particular, we have France, Germany, and Switzerland that have very refined codes and are typical examples for civil law jurisdictions. In comparison, the common law is based on cases or judicial precedents. So these are judgments or decisions that have been made by the judges, and they continue to have a binding force for later cases. And this kind of system is also called Anglo American law because, in the first place, we find the common law in the United Kingdom, but it has been spread to the United States, and we also find it in other countries like Australia and Canada. So, all these would be typical examples for common law jurisdictions. And then we have other legal systems that can be based on customary law or religion, for example, Muslim law. And then we also have many countries that have a kind of mixed legal system. So, what about Taiwan? If you study law in Taiwan, you will soon discover that you have to discover many codes. For example, the civil law code or the criminal law code. Also, the constitution is a kind of codification and other statutory laws. That's why Taiwan, we can say, it generally is a civil law system. The cases in Taiwan that are made by the courts generally only bind the parties, so we don't have a general principle of binding precedents. But the interpretations of the grand justices have the same binding force as the Constitution itself. We also have some other influences of Anglo American law, and we also have the influences of customary law. If you read, for example, the Civil Code, Article 1, it says, if there is no applicable act, the case shall be decided according to customs. So, as a result, we see that we also have many other influences in Taiwan, and therefore we can describe Taiwan also as a mixed legal system. So, the question now, what is the difference between common law and civil law? And how would you describe Taiwan's legal system? Next, if we look at the development of law, we discover that laws don't just happen by accident, right? They don't just fall down from the sky, but there is always a story behind the law, why it was enacted. And from this perspective, we can say that law often is a reflection of history. And if we now look at the history of Taiwan, it was often occupied by foreign forces starting in the 17th century. The Europeans came to Taiwan and occupied certain parts of Taiwan. For example, in 1624, the Dutch settled in the southwest of Taiwan, and also the Spanish came to northern Taiwan in 1626. The Spanish did not stay very long. They were soon driven away by the Dutch, and the Dutch themselves stayed until 1662, when the famous Zheng Gong or Kushinga came from mainland China and drove away the Dutch. Mr. Zheng was a follower of the Ming dynasty. However, by the time he came to Taiwan and occupied Taiwan, the Ming dynasty was already replaced by the Qing dynasty. And the Qing dynasty themselves, they came from Manchuria, the northeast of China, and then they occupied Beijing. And the Qing dynasty then also came to Taiwan to drive away Zheng Gong, and thus they also controlled then parts of Taiwan starting 1683. And they later also declared Taiwan a province. That is why in 1895, at the end of the First Sino-Japanese War, the Chinese, when they lost the war against Japan, the Qing dynasty ceded Taiwan to Japan according to the Treaty of Shimonoseki. So, starting 1895, Taiwan came under the rule of the Japanese, and this lasted for 50 years. During this time, Japan in 1896 passed its civil code, which was again based on the German model. And as a result, the Japanese transmitted German legal theory to Taiwan, but also to Korea, which was also under the rule of Japan. And that is why, as a result of Japanese colonial rule, there are common legal traditions between Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. When the Second World War ended in 1945, Japan had to return Taiwan, and this is now the big question. Who should Japan return Taiwan to? Because at that time, the Qing dynasty did not exist anymore. The Qing dynasty was ended in 1911 when the Republic of China was founded uh, on mainland China as a result of a revolution. And therefore, Japan then returned Taiwan to the Republic of China, at least on a provisional basis. So, starting 1945, the Republic of China then assumed jurisdiction or control over Taiwan. And the Republic of China in 1947 also made a constitution However, the constitution did not take effect or did not become effective in Taiwan until 1987, because what happened in 1949, a Chinese civil war broke out. And that was between the Republic of China and the Communist Party. The Communist Party won this civil war and established the People's Republic of China, whereas the Republic of China relocated the government to Taiwan and started ruling in Taiwan under a special law that is called martial law, or a law that applies during times of war until 1987. And then the democratic reforms really started to take place in Taiwan. It's also important to note that after the Second World War, the United States was the big power or the big influence because they won the war and continued to dominate the times, including also Taiwan after the Second World War. So the question for you, which major jurisdictions have played a major role in the course of Taiwan's legislative history? Law also often reflects its culture and society. And if we look at the culture and society in Taiwan, we see that the Confucian traditions, of course, played an important role, especially when Taiwan was under the control of mainland China. And the Confucian tradition of philosophy very much emphasizes hierarchy and authority. So, certain persons that have certain positions will enjoy a certain respect. For example, the typical example would be children should obey their parents. However, in addition to Confucianism, Taiwan has been exposed to many other influences because Taiwan has always been an immigrant nation. Even though the indigenous people, the Malayo-Polynesians, have been living in Taiwan for thousands of years, the majority of the population, 95%, then immigrated from China, and there are different subgroups of the Han population. And also more recently, many immigrants came from Southeast Asia. And so we see that Taiwan, as a result, has been receptive to external ideas and cultures, including foreign legal concepts. And that is why Taiwan later discovered that, oh, we do have to protect also the indigenous people, exactly because we have so many foreign influences. And therefore, in 2005, a law was passed called the Indigenous Peoples Basic Law to protect the basic or fundamental rights of the indigenous people. And in 2017, a law was passed to protect the indigenous languages. So, this is the Indigenous Languages Development Act. So we see that Taiwan is a multicultural society. Question: how do culture and society impact the legal environment in Taiwan? The economy, of course, is very, very important as well. And so the law often is a reflection of the economy. After the Second World War, Taiwan's economy began to grow very rapidly, and this was even called the Taiwan miracle, or Taiwan's economy has also been compared to a tiger, so it's also called one of the Asian tigers. Talking of economy, the economic relationship with mainland China, of course, has been very important in the past. And one milestone for cross-strait trade and investment was the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, or ECFA, signed in 2010. This is to protect and liberalize the free trade between mainland China and Taiwan. And of course, we also have other very important trade partners with the United States, with the European countries, or the EU more generally, and other nations. And as a result, Taiwan also has to comply with the Western legal standards. And here I give you a case that happened very recently. The big question was whether or not Taiwan should allow the import of US beef and pork. So the concern here was that the beef and the pork from the United States could contain certain drug residues and could therefore be a risk for the health of the people. However, if we want to liberalize our trade with the United States, and in the future, the hope is to sign a free trade agreement between Taiwan and the United States, then obviously we would have to liberalize the trade and not have such strict restrictions. And that is why the government decided to lift or ease the restrictions on the US beef and pork. And this question was even subject to a national referendum in November 2021. And so the majority of the people then agreed with this kind of liberalization. So, question: how would you describe Taiwan's economy, and why is it significant for Taiwan's legal development? The law also is a reflection of politics. And one very important, significant political development in Taiwan is its democratization. The Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, was founded in Taiwan in 1986, and the first direct presidential elections then took place 10 years later in 1996. And the first president to be directly elected by the people democratically was Li Denghui. 4 years later, the first peaceful transfer of power took place from the KMT to the DPP when President Chen from the DPP was elected to become the next president. And shortly thereafter, in 2003, the Referendum Act was enacted in Taiwan that gives citizens the possibility to directly vote on issues of local or national importance. So, an example for a referendum would be the example that I already mentioned on the importation of pork from the United States taking place in November 2021. As a result, the import of pork from the United States is now permitted starting 2022. So we see that the stepwise democratization in Taiwan has had very clear impact on the laws. The passing of a law certainly is not something that can be achieved very easily and often requires a political consensus, especially when we have several big parties, like in Taiwan. And therefore, it's not easy to make a law, and therefore, often the laws will only be a minimum consensus, and then will defer to the executive to make the more specific administrative regulations. So we see that there is a preference for this kind of strategy where the law will often authorize the executive to specify the laws. And in Taiwan, we do have a very strong executive who not only make the administrative regulations but also guide will provide a kind of informal administrative guidance, for example, by intervening in the private sector to achieve certain government policies. And this is also called governmental paternalism. So, like a parent, the government would try to guide and advise the private sector. Question: to what extent do political constellations affect the legal environment in Taiwan? Now that we know that laws are a reflection of history, of culture and society, of the economy and politics, I want to provide you with some facts and international rankings concerning Taiwan. So you can guess how much of Taiwan's land is protected area. Is it 5%, 10%, 20%, or 30%? And now guess how long is the island of Taiwan? Is it less than 400 kilometers? Is it about 500 kilometers? Is it about 700 kilometers? Or is it more than 800 kilometers? Guess how long does it take to travel from the north, the city of Taipei, to the south, the city of Kaohsiung? Does it take less than 100 minutes? About 3 hours? About 4 hours? Or more than 5 hours? Well, the answer here depends on whether you take the bus or the train or the high speed. And since we now have the high speed rail, it is very, very fast. And you can travel from the northern Taipei to the southern Kaohsiung within 94 minutes. How wide is the island of Taiwan? Is it less than 150 kilometers? About 200 kilometers? About 400 kilometers? Or more than 500 kilometers? For those who love to climb mountains, where do you find the highest peak in East Asia? Name one of the most competitive economies in the world, which is also one of the best places to invest and do business. Which nation is a leading producer of computer chips? Which nation is a global leader in information and communication technologies? Which nation offers one of the most comprehensive and best medical services in the world? Where on earth do you find one of the most fertile soils where you can grow almost any kinds of fruits and vegetables? Which travel paradise offers anything you can dream of, be it beaches and hot springs or snow-covered mountain peaks, modern skyscrapers or ancient temples, exquisite delicacies or street food? The answer is easy. It's, of course, always Taiwan. And this brings me to the conclusion. The example of Taiwan shows that laws don't just happen by accident. They are a result of historic, economic, social, and political developments. Today, Taiwan generally qualifies as a civil law system based on codes and statutory laws. Owing to other significant influences, Taiwan's legal culture can also be described as mixed. Surely, Taiwan has much to offer with its diverse background of peoples, languages, religions, cuisines, and natural landscapes. I invite you to learn more about law and society in Taiwan and discover the uniqueness of this beautiful island. And I finally encourage you to take a look at the references. I try to provide you with a concise overview, but you will understand the issues much better if you read the references that I provide in the attachment. And you can also take a look at the black letter law and some videos that are available on the internet.